face of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times, you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a very little while, now it's quoting Habakkuk, he who is coming will come and will not delay, but my righteous one will live by faith, and if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. And then Hebrews 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Thank you, Catherine. How's that? Interesting. By the way, if you, that's the passage, the Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, we're going to be looking at, and it is on page 975 if you want to look at the Bible on your table. This is actually part 2 of a message we started last week, and there are some of you that weren't here last week, so I'll have to preach it entirely again before we start. Now, I do want to review, though, because we're talking about the Christian race. We talked about that last week. Paul, the missionary, the great apostle of God, in the first church, when he wrote letters of instruction and love to the various churches that he planted, the ones that first heard the gospel under his teaching and preaching, he used the metaphor of a race quite often. So we're talking about the Christian race. We talked last week, what is it? Is it a sprint or a marathon? Those that were here last week. Marathon. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We're not in it for speed, to hold the record. Like the shot put queen today here. Holds the record. I don't know what school you go to, but there it is. We're in it for the long haul. Does anybody else want to remember anything we talked about that's unique about the Christian race, the Christian marathon? We talked about a few things. If you don't, that's okay. Anybody else remember anything we said specifically?
Distractions or obstacles.
Okay, yeah. We talked about in a marathon, as in the Christian life, there are distractions. There are obstacles in the way. All kinds of things. But anyway, in saying all of that, I do want to review a few things from last week. First of all, let's go over our terms and our phrases, because when you teach or preach on a metaphor like this that Paul uses, it's easy to get confused. Talking to race or my life in Christ at work? I forget what we're talking about. It's all the same thing. But we want to make it clear of this. We want to talk about Christian race. When we say that, we're talking about our lives lived for Christ in this world. Today, tomorrow, the next day, the next day. When we wake up, through the day, through the night, until we meet him face to face. When we say Christian race, we're on a race together, we're going together. That's what we're talking about. And it is a marathon. We're talking stamina. We're talking endurance. We're talking reaching for the prize. Now, it's another thing Paul talks a lot about is this prize. Now, Paul does not have a wreath, garland wreath around your head, a trophy that you're handed. The prize that we see in the Scriptures is, we said, finishing well. Finish well. What does that mean? To finish well, to get the prize, the crown that is spoken of in the Bibles, means to have lived our lives faithfully, pursuing God's plan of reconciling all things to himself. That's a mouthful. Because you got to remember, if there was a line, a timeline, and eternally that way is God's plan, it would be reconciling all things to himself. Because within the timeline, when man fell in the garden, when he chose to rebel, that was all, creation was all messed up. A lot of things happened. So God, in his great love and his great mercy and his great wisdom, the eternal plan is, I'm going to reconcile all things to myself, especially people. He wants all people to be reconciled to him, to come to him, to be reunited with him in love. That's what he wants. Our job, our prize is to have lived our lives in such a way as to we have devoted everything we are to achieving that goal in our world. Any questions? It's a little confusing. What's to me? So maybe it will be to you too. I don't know. But I think we've got it. So if I use the word mission, that's what it is. That's what I'm talking about. Our mission in life is that same goal. We want to remind ourselves that, as Catherine read in our passage, the reason I kind of go, we don't know the author of Hebrews, but I kind of go with Paul. So much of it sounds like him to me, so if I say Paul, grain of salt, may or may not be. But the author is writing because these Hebrew Christians, Gentile, Jewish, they've gone through a lot of suffering, a lot of persecution, a lot of hard times, enough to where they're faltering in their run, in their race. You know how it is though, right? When we go through a lot of hard times in our lives, and you notice you're getting ticked off at God, and you start thinking, man, I'm going to go to church. You know, I'm kind of tired of this. We're faltering a little bit. And that's why Paul is writing, or the author is writing, because he understands this and he sees this, that you've gone through a lot of hard times, you're beginning to falter, so he writes a letter of instruction and of encouragement. That's where the Hebrew Christians are at, or the Jewish, non-Jewish, but the Christians who he's writing to, that's where they're at, the weakening in their faith. Often too, some, and many others that Paul had dealt with, when they get to a certain level of weakness, they're tempted to go back to other rituals in their past, to put a lot of their spiritual weight on these things instead of on Christ alone. And that's really dangerous ground. So it's another warning. You're faltering, you were tempted to go back to some of the more works-oriented stuff. Well, let's talk about this. So, and last week we talked about the first part of Hebrews chapter 12. Talks about, because we're on this race, let us lay aside all this excess weight, the sin that so easily besets us, so that we can run to endurance. We talked about 4 things that might keep us from running effectively. We talked about things that blur our vision. In the race, we have a course in mind, a course set before us. There's a starting point and there's a finish, and we keep our eyes on the finish, but sometimes in life things blur our vision, like fear of the unknown. Let's face it, when you walk with God, you don't always know what's coming, and it's scary sometimes.
You don't always know what's coming?
You never know what's coming. That's right. Good point. So that might blur our vision, or if you've got a background in legalistic religion, you might not be able to see the end because of all this stuff that you've always heard your whole life. things that lessen our passion, our resolve, or our faithfulness. I'm so used in my Christian life to living by rules and regulations and my own strength and energies into a certain set of religion of life that I was always exhausted. So did I have resolve, stamina to run the race? No, I didn't. So that's one of the things that lessen our passion. Routine, complacency, trying to run in our own strength. Apart from the Holy Spirit, that's going to exhaust us. Or things that take us off our true course. You know, it could be position, success, power, fame, pride, anything on this earth that gets our attention so strongly that we're veering off course. Or things that seem more appealing than the prize. Lots of things in life, if we're not careful, can seem more appealing than this prize down the road. Might be 30, 40 years before I get there, you know, all these kind of things. So that's a little review from last week. This week, that was kind of before you start running. The things you kind of need to do to get ready to go. You get rid of this excess weight. Anything that's stopping you, keeping you weighed down. I'll joke sometimes about Ethan and me. We play tennis. And more than once, we've had a lot of McDonald's food before we've gone. Doesn't enhance the fun a whole lot, but we'll always joke and say, well, studies have come out and said in vigorous sports, it's always better to gorge yourself before you do it. So, yeah. So again, 975 is Hebrews chapter 12, 1 and 2, if you want to look at it in your Bibles. This week, now we're going to talk about while in the race. We are racing. Now we're on the race itself. The Christians, again, are undergoing various hardships, faltering. Now, I know we know what that's like, right? Anybody not know what it's like to falter or have hardships come your way? Anybody not know how it feels to be a little ticked at God or very angry at God? So, and it's a common thing to life. It is. I go through it. So we relate very strongly to these Christians that Paul is writing to. But out of here, I want to talk about three things that are helpful in order to run faithfully, because we want to remember that. The goal, the prize is to have run your race faithfully. Now, there's a lot to that. A lot to that. God knows the hearts, but you see, I used to be confused by, in churches I've been to, you'd see 80, 90-year-old Christians at your church that were always angry or, you know, I always wondered, have they been this way their whole lives? I mean, is this their life in Christ? And others, you know, that obviously have let things their whole lives detour them away from the course that God has given them. So we want to be ones that run faithfully the course God has set for us. Now let me say this. We each have a course to run. If you're in Christ, if you've given your lives to Christ, if you've asked Him for forgiveness, you've received His grace and mercy, you've devoted your life to Him, then you are on a course in this race. You got that? Individually, we all are. Are we on the same course or are we on a different course? Same race, different race. Let me put it that way.
How about both?
Good point. What do you mean by both?
Well, the big course is what you said earlier. We're all trying to reconcile ourselves and others and bring other people to Christ. So there's one big, kind of broad course that I think we all, Dave Byrne, what he has to do is different than what Brianna and Raquel have to do. Because we all have different gifts and different callings.
Maybe we all run different courses and have the same ending place.
True, too.
Great.
Good way of putting that.
I think it makes mean the same thing, basically. I think, yeah, but the point I want to make, and we'll talk about it as we go too, that the Bible speaks to individuals. right? That's clear. But more often, and primarily, I think, that it's the individuals in a body. We can't separate the two. We here are individuals. There's a bunch of us here. We have a course that is set up for us. But primarily, and what we don't always remember, it's so hard to remember, especially in American culture, that we primarily are members one of another. We're not running alone. We are together. You have a race to run. I have a race to run. But primarily, we are running this race. And I'm speaking to MOSAIC right now. It's true of every Christian, every church, Christian church in America throughout the centuries. But right here, I'm talking to MOSAIC. We have to get beyond us, our individual lives. And that's hard because I'm probably the worst at it. But let's keep that in mind too. We are a body. Let's look. So of the three things that are helpful in order to run the race faithfully, that's the key word, faithfully. Number one, we want encouragement from others to run well. Encouragement from others to run well. The author in the previous chapter, chapter 11, goes through quite a few lives of Christian saints, or saints of God in the Old Testament primarily, but that have run the race before. People like Abel and what's his name? Lost it. David, others. I'm trying to think of the one that didn't die, but just disappeared. Enoch, thank you. But of all these people that have, in the past, ran the race before us, we need to remember we're part of an ancient Christian heritage, part of an ancient body of the people of God. We're not new to this race. We're not the first ones to have gotten out there. We're continuing the race began millennia ago. And we can take strength and encouragement and inspiration from these saints of the past. They talk a lot about the primary reason, if you see in verse chapter 11, the last verse, no, take that verse, 39 and 40. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us so that together with us they would be made perfect. Because we keep talking about the prize, but what the author here is making the point of, these believers in the past, the ones we can look to for encouragement, devoted everything they were to living their lives, pursuing this faithfulness to God. And they didn't always get on earth, or very rarely did they get on earth, a reward for what they endured. And that's not the way God works it, right? I mean, let's face it, we live our lives to glorify Him. Chances are you're not going to see a whole lot of earthly rewards. But are the rewards out there? Yeah. So we're running the race, but we're running on faith. Just like these saints in ages past. So if we're running and we're faltering and we're getting tired, first thing we can do is remember. Remember the past. Remember those that have gone on long before us. And take courage and strength from those that have ran with stamina, working for something they could not see, but they knew was out there, just like us. And then we can take encouragement from us, from those around us on the race. Especially here at MOSAIC, because that's who I'm talking to today. That's who we are. We're committed to this gathering of people on this race that we're all on. We're committed to encouraging one another. Now let me ask you this. When you're going through difficulty, or could be a sporting event, of great striving, whatever it may be, what does encouragement do for you from someone else?
Motivates.
Well, the thing is it is a reminder, again, because we're in such a mindset that we are running alone. It's nice to know every so often that, oh, wait a minute, I'm not alone. They're in this too. Again, we are part of a body. And we have to remember that. We're enduring together. Part of what encouragement does is when you encourage someone, you're taking part of that burden on yourself. You're lightening the load when you encourage someone else. You can do it. Come on. I've done this too. I've been through this. We'll make it. But I'll help you make it. You're taking part of the burden away. There's an old saying that says, the burden shared is half the burden. The joy shared is twice the joy. Encouragement lets us know that we are loved. Encouragement lessens our burdens and lightens our hearts. Let me go back a second to the things that we talked about that blurred our vision. Just think about this for a second. Let's say I'm afraid of the unknown in my walk with God. Let's face it, I don't know what's going to happen this afternoon. And if I stop to think about it, I get all freaked out. Because, and I know a large part of my life where I knew God was up there waiting to go. I just didn't know it was going to come. But if I have an encouragement from someone, and I'm afraid of the unknown, that person can say, I'm with you in this. We'll take it together. It's all right. Or maybe I've gone through some things that just shocked me, but I made it because they were there for me, and I'll be with you. Or if I'm, like I am, often a complacent Christian, and if I'm enjoying an easier journey in my life, a section of the journey in my life, and I'm kind of taking things for granted, that person might say, come on, let's do this. Let's get up and get moving. Let's try a different challenge. So that's the kind of thing that the encouragement does for us. And again, I'm saying all this. We know it's true. We've heard messages all our lives, a lot of us. But I'm saying it so that we take it to heart today. That encouragement is a large part of why we're here. To this day, I don't know. Just think about it to yourselves. How well do you know these sitting around us today? A lot of us are, relatively new to each other as far as relationships in our lives. But if we're committed to this body, we have to remember encouragement is vital to our ministry. Any comments or questions to that at this point?
So it's a reminder not only to take the encouragement, but to give the encouragement.
Yeah.
We take, I think that encouragement from your daughter, just that effort of those people who said, hey, let's put together a care package, made her day.
Oh, yeah.
Totally raised her up her hope and her spirit. So, and we're not always going to do something like that where you can see it. Somebody sends you a card and say thank you so much, but that really made a difference. But the little things you can do can make a huge difference in somebody's life.
Exactly. We've all experienced that, I hope. All right. So encouragement is vital. Another thing that can help us level. Anyway, another thing that can help us to run faithfully is a constant focus on our life's course. Now here I'm kind of speaking individually because we talked about running together, same course, but different course. We're each unique. Now I want to go to, I think, it could be everyone here's life verse. Acts chapter 20, verse 24. It's on page 902 in that Bible. Because this, to me, sums up the entire subject that we're talking about. And the thought is we have to have a constant focus on our life's course. And in the book of Acts, of course, is the narrative of the early church. This is Paul. He's leaving the church in Ephesus to move on. And as he's saying goodbye, he says, verse 24 of Acts chapter 20, "However, I consider my life worth nothing to me, if only I may finish the race and complete the task that the Lord Jesus has given me, the task of testifying to the gospel of God's grace." You see that what I'm saying there? Any one of us could put our name to that, and that would be a good mission statement for our life. So, if that is the mission statement for everyone's life, which it is, that's the same thing we're talking about. We're living our lives, faithfully pursuing God's ministry of reconciliation, bringing others to Him. But what we have to do to make it our own specific course, I know it. You take that passage and you insert your strengths. Now, each one of us here are different in many, many ways. We each have different strengths, different areas in our lives that are stronger than others. You know, you have something stronger in your life than I have. So you insert your strengths into this mission statement of our life. And then you take your passions and you insert that. What are your passions? You know, many people's passions are different than mine. Anybody want to share a passion that you have? Buddy? What's a passion? Or make it generic. What's a passion someone might have?
Music.
Music, okay. Rebecca, did you have a quick comment?
I was just saying that.
Oh, music. Music. What else? Anything?
Writing.
Writing?
Drawing.
Drawing, sports. Okay. We all have different passions. So we insert that because God has given us these passions. And we insert that into this passage. We each have different gifts that God has given us. The Bible makes that very clear. We have each been given gifts from Him to fulfill His purposes for our life. And then another thing that is different amongst us is our experiences. We've had some experiences in our lives that make us who we are today. Those can help a long ways in reaching someone that I can't reach. I've not had that. I've had a lot of emotional struggles, depression. Very easy for me to reach out to others like that. Could be financial struggles, could be anything. Those experiences can help us as we live our lives testifying to the gospel of God's grace. But to keep our focus on our race, our course, starting tomorrow, let's think about it daily as we wake up, reminding yourself, I am on a race. The prize I am reaching for is to have run faithfully for God's heart. This is how I am running my life. Moment by moment, let's remember that. I'm not my own. I am His, living for His glory to further His purposes. So whether we're at home or at work or community, errands, meetings, sports, whatever, when you're there, you're an ambassador for Christ. You're doing your job. You're enjoying your sports. But that's why you're there, because that's who you are. Saying something like this, I am a unique member of God's church, called to testify God's grace and to share His love to all, sometimes by word, sometimes by example, always by grace and love. When you're like that, that's your calling. And when you remember these things day to day, no matter where you're at, people will have been touched by God. And you will make a difference. So the last thing I have is, to help us run faithfully is encouragement from others. It might be inspiration from the past, encouragement from those around us. But we also want to keep an intense focus on the course that we're running, remembering who we are, remembering what our life's goal is. Always straining and reaching for the prize that God has for us. The last thing is to be driven by the example and inspiration of Jesus, who endured much more faithfully to fulfill God's heart of reconciliation. Go back just to read that again. Hebrews 12, verse 2. First it says, let us run with endurance the race marked out for us. Then he says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. That's the example Paul gives us that we are to follow, of Jesus himself. His prize was lovingly, fully, completely obeying the will of his Father in reconciliation, although to him it entailed torture, suffering, abuse, crucifixion. So why does it say, for the joy set before him? We talked about that, my wife and I, the other day. But what Jesus said of us many times is that my reason, and paraphrase, my reason for existence is to follow the Father's will. That is the joy Jesus lived for, no matter what it took. His heart was delighted by obeying his Father. And for the joy set before Jesus, he endured the cross, because that meant what he was doing was to be able to fulfill the entire work of reconciliation. That's how we come to be reunited with God, because we've placed our faith in Jesus. So Jesus' prize, his joy, was fulfilling what was needed for God to bring us back to him. This joy was constantly before him in his life on earth, driving him forward on his mission. Now, what he saw everything in relation to the joy he would receive in relation to his coming Lord. That's what we need to follow as well. The prize, everything in our lives that comes, might be the death of a loved one, disease, financial struggle, marital struggles, loss of job, whatever it may be. This is much easier said than done. Take my word for it. Should be seen in relation